Hello everybody, and welcome back to One Nerd to Rule Them All. And in today's video, we're returning to the Warhammer universe as we cover Emperor Karl Franz, the Emperor of Man, and the man who was deemed perhaps the best statesman and general that the old world had seen in centuries. We have a lot to uncover, so let's get into the video. Karl Franz is the son of former Emperor Leopold I. In the year 2470 of the imperial calendar, Emperor Leopold and a young Karl Franz had been ambushed whilst in the Reichwald forest by beastmen. The two were being guarded by the Reich Guard, but despite their bravery and loyalty, they were all killed by Gorgons, leaving just the Emperor and his son alone. Just as they were going to be killed by a Minotaur's axe, they were saved by Wood Elves, who emerged and mysteriously came to their rescue, killing the beastkin before disappearing back into the trees. Karl Franz's father would go on to rule for another 32 years before passing away in his sleep. Shortly after, in a closed vote of the electoral counts, Karl was elected to replace his father. In the same year, he was crowned Emperor Karl Franz, the first in the High Temple of Sigmar in Altdorf. After his ascension to the imperial throne, Karl Franz wanted to prove to his beloved subjects that he was not a man of decadence or greed, but a man that would and could lead his people out of the darkest of times. Following this, Karl decided that a show of military force could only strengthen his position as the new emperor, and so he began a military campaign to clear the wilderness of enemy threats. Ever since the Great War against Chaos in 2301, the number of beastmen and chaos cults had steadily increased over time. Karl Franz's advisors told him that in the north the winds of magic blow strong once more, and dark omens abound a terrible storm that would engulf the world in war. It would take several years or even decades, but the forces of chaos would inevitably return, driven by the expansion of the chaos wastes and the call of their dark gods. This resulted in a steady increase in Norse raids along the Empire's coastline and the northern border, growing bolder and even more numerous with each passing day. This created fear and havoc amongst the many towns and fishing villages along the coast of the province of Nordland. In response, the first act Karl Franz took as the new emperor was to march his way north as the head of a massive imperial army and reinforce the armies of the Electoral Count Theodoric Geyser. None of his generals or advisors had any way to predict when or where the Norse would strike next, and so Karl Franz had to rely on his cadre of powerful celestial wizards to aid him in his planning. These members possessed the mystical ability to foretell the future by observing the heavens. When the next mass raid came upon the northern shore of Nordland, Karl and his armies were there ready to meet them. The ravenous Chaos Marauders were welcomed by a volley of bullets and crossbolts fired by a battle line of Imperial troops, with the carefully concealed longships of the Norsemen sunk by a frightening barrage of Imperial gunfire and cannon batteries. The Norsemen had nowhere to run. In this battle, hundreds of the Marauders died without a fight, their bodies sinking to the bottom of the sea, along with the heavy bulk of their ships. Those who managed to reach the shores were met by a disciplined line of swordsmen, spearmen, and halberdiers. The raiders were massacred to the last, and Emperor Karl Franz himself led the charge against the final shield wall of the Norse's last and most battle-hardened warriors. Since his election, Karl Franz had won victory after victory and conquest after conquest, taking command of his troops personally whenever possible. He brought with him the legendary Garmaraz and his fellow Griffin companion Deathclaw. It was Karl Franz who led the decisive charge of the Reich Guard Knights against the Knights of Bretonia at the Battle of Nolduin in 2502. On the legendary Field of Blood, it was the courage of the Emperor's own heroics that steadied the Imperial line against the thunderous charge of Warg Spleenripper. In his war against the eastern hordes of Murkal Hai the Savage, he personally led his great sword regiment into the very heart of the enemy army and broke the skull of the Chaos Champion with a single swing of his mighty warhammer. Because of this, there was little doubt that Karl Franz was one of the greatest generals of his time. He stood at the forefront of the battle against those who would have seen his beloved homeland torn in two, a responsibility that weighed heavily upon his shoulders. Karl Franz often rode into battle mounted on his loyal companion Deathclaw, the griffin who Karl himself raised since he was a mere egg. Deathclaw, a noble and majestic beast, is believed to be the mightiest imperial griffin to have ever lived. A powerful bond existed between Deathclaw and Emperor Karl Franz. It was a bond once forged in countless battles and many adventures. As the years passed, the Empire continued to grow in power and influence, and Karl Franz engaged in major projects to improve the well-being of his subjects and the common people. Reich Marshal Kurt Hellborn fulfilled the will of his emperor without question, leading the imperial armies in combat against the ogre bandits of Tyran Berserkers, greenskin raiders of the Broken Tooth tribe, and the Skaven that infested the Howling Hills, site of the famous victory of Mandred Skavenslayer during the Skaven Wars. In the year 2504, a warhead of Minotaurs was threatening to cross the Grey Mountains into Athelloren, also known as the Everwood. An extract from the book Warhammer Armies Wood Elves recites the events as follows. Ariel bade her spellweavers divert the swollen waters of the River Wise and force the beasts back into the Empire. It was then that the Emperor Karl Franz did that which none of his forebears had ever done. He walked beneath the elves of Athelloren to seek aid. The Great Council was little inclined to accede the Emperor's demands, for they perceived that his greatness was worn as a mantle, rather than flowed from a source within, yet nor could they deny the logic of his plea. After that revelation, Orion, Ariel's consort, led the wild hunt over the mountains to aid the Empire. Whilst this happened, the Emperor rallied the embattled army of Weisenland. The book continues as it reads, Orion and Nath the Prophetess led the swiftest riders of Athelloren far afield and struck at the warhead's flanks. Following the path of carnage, left by their kings, Glade Riders and celebrants of Kernos carried their spears deep into the heart of the Minotaur's formation. Soon after, Orion, also known as the King in the Woods, slew the Doom Bull whose blood rage had begun the rampage. The elves' advances were successful, causing the Minotaurs to fall back, but this had a devastating effect that they could not foresee coming. Seeing their foes quiver, the men of the Empire gave out a great cheer, but they did so too soon. The wind shifted, and the scent of blood it carried drove the Minotaurs into a fresh frenzy. Suddenly behest by an enemy that they had thought beaten, the brave men of Weisenland suffered greatly. Regiments of halberdiers and great swords were hacked apart, filling the air with yet more bloodsport, and driving the Minotaurs even more berserk. Karl Franz moved to reinforce the line, but was swept from the back of his horse by a Kygor boulder. Orion had seen Emperor Karl Franz being knocked to the ground, but he did not rush to help him, thinking only of himself and his own kin. He himself was wounded by a Gorgon, and was debating falling back behind the floodwaters of the Weiss once again. Nath, sensing Orion's indecision, reminded her liege that the fate of the world rested on more than just them. It did not matter, she said, if the Emperor's reach exceeded his grasp. What matters was the nobility of his cause. Orion rounded upon Nath with an expression so full of fury that the priestess feared for her life. Then Orion let out a great laugh, before sounding his great horn that was so loud, its winding was heard as far away as Athelloren. This is what the army of the elves needed. The elves charged forward, united as one, towards the line of the humans, and towards Emperor Karl Franz. Lost in a haze of bloodletting, the Minotaurs did not realise their danger until it was too late. Bows sang spears thrust forward, and the Minotaurs soon found the tide of battle turning against them. The King in the Woods fought his way to the downed Emperor, planting his hooves either side of the wounded man, and bellowed a charge that the blood-maddened warhead could not deny. By the time the enemy realised their mistake, Orion had killed nearly 70 of their greatest champions using his spear. But the King in the Woods was not left unscathed in this battle. His godly ichor flowed freely from a dozen ragged wounds, but Karl Franz had not suffered so much as a single blow during the hours in which Orion had stood guard over his unconscious form. Once he awakened, Karl Franz could not thank his saviour, as he, along with the elves, had left the field, after gathering their dead, once the Minotaurs had retreated from battle. A month after the battle had ended, an emissary arrived from Athelloren, and entered the palace of Altdorf. This emissary remained nameless, but he came with 2 things, a gift and a message. The gift provided was a single griffin egg that had been received from the highest peak in the Grey Mountains. As for the message, it was both simple and ominous. It read, "We will be watching." In the year 2505, Maximilian von Koningswald, an essential electee during Karl Franz's election, had passed. Following this, his son, Oswald, was named heir. Karl Franz came personally to offer his condolences. Franz even reminisced with Oswald about how Maximilian had been more like a father to his own son, Leopold, and that he would gladly come to the play of his friend's great victory over Constant Drachenfels, the Great Enchanter. He was an infamous demonologist and necromancer who plagued the Empire for a millennia. An extract from the book Drachenfels by Kim Newton reads as follows: "With friends and family around him, and ignoring warning signs such as a dream of his son Leopold with levitating monks that warned him to not come to Castle Drachenfels as fancies." But as Karl Franz watched the play, he realised that the events on display seemed far too real. Franz sought to leave, but was stopped by Oswald, who was holding the Emperor at knife point, forcing him to stay. Oswald had a plan to resurrect the Great Enchanter, but found it foiled by Detlev Cyric. Enraged by his plan falling apart, Oswald cut Emperor Karl Franz's throat. He attempted to flee after the fact, but was slain. Despite this devastating injury, the Emperor survived, but for a while after, he could only speak in whispers until he was fully recovered. Due to their betrayal, the Koningswald were stripped of their titles, and instead they were given to the von Tasseniks. It was during that winter that the Emperor faced his next challenge. When Karl Franz returned from his stay in Talbotheim, a devious plot from the Skavens to replace him with a doppelganger had been put into place. It was discovered that certain members of the Palace Guard of the Imperial Palace had been complicit in the plot, after they had been corrupted by the Taneshi cult of the Jade Scepter. The plan had been engineered by the Tzentchen champion known as Skullface. The Emperor was taken captive by the Grey Seer Gaxar within the Imperial Palace, and would have died had he not been saved by the Ostland warrior Konrad and the Grace of Sigmar. When his own corrupted guard tried to turn on him when the attempt to replace Karl Franz failed, but Konrad and the renegade wizard Litzenreich and the Knights of Wolfgang von Neuwald defended him. Karl Franz, although weakened, promised to honour them and was escorted by 2 of the Templars of Sigmar to safety. Karl Franz declared Konrad a hero and his crimes forgiven, but despite this pardon, neither he nor his companions could be found again to be honoured. At the beginning of 2512, the Emperor made a series of decisions that had some people questioning his sanity. Through the Reichland Diet, an emergency decree was passed, which annexed Obersreich. Its ruler, Sigismund von Jugfreud, was stripped of his title and forced to flee into his ancestral lands of the Duchy of Black Rock. Apparently this was in response to recent tensions between the duchies of Wallenstein and Obersreich. According to Warhammer RPG 4th edition, a guide to Obersreich, the bill placed before Reichsland Diet in the small hours of the morning cited Garth Sigismund's belligerent and aggressive military build-up that challenged the limitations of his ducal rights as a primary reason for his removal. Because of this, it seems Karl Franz acted on intelligence provided by his uncle, Emanuel Ferrand, who had been fed false information by the Black Chamber, which had been secretly infiltrated by a group of chaos cultists of the Purple Hand. However, this action had an effect on others around him. Astute politicians worried that Karl Franz could take away others' lands from noble houses without a second thought. Due to this, trust in Karl Franz was damaged, and nobles throughout the empire sought to expand their retinues of soldiers in order to defend themselves against him. It was around this time that Karl Franz grew mysteriously ill. A double was needed to keep his appearance of a stronger emperor, while the real one was bound to his bed. It was during this time, whilst his mind was clouded, Shalian reformers were able to persuade him to draft a decree that made prosecution of mutants an offence, inciting the cult of Sigmar as well as numerous electors against him. This caused mass unrest, followed in various cities of the Reichland. As the situation worsened, and the Sigmarian heresy flared up again in the northern provinces, the Council of State and the Grand Thegonists decided to end them by public union. The marriage of Crown Prince Wolfgang von Holzwig-Albenar with Katrina Todbringer, daughter of Graf Boris Todbringer of Middenheim. Unfortunately, the wedding was interrupted by the attempted assassination of the Middelheimers through a Nordland separatist. In an emergency electoral conclave, Karl Franz was too sick to attend and had to be replaced by a double. The conclave became heated, and in it, Boris Runefang clashed with Gal Maraz and shattered it, revealing it to be a copy. The destruction of the most treasured symbol of imperial unity caused the conclave to fail and imperial authority to be permanently weakened, paving the way for civil war. A group of heroes managed to retrieve the true hammer from a cavern in the Blackfire Pass, where Sigmar had once battled an exalted lord of change by the name of Shera. Unknown to all, this was part of a ploy concocted by the daemon to free itself. As the ceremony was conducted, magical rifts opened over Altdorf, Bogenhafen, Obersreich, Middenheim, Talabheim, Backenfahren, Averheim, Nuln, and Remus, unleashing demonic hordes upon them. Only with great sacrifices could the demon be defeated, and the Purple Hand and their sinister plans for an empire dominated by chaos be destroyed. With the clouding fog of poison and sickness behind him, and the true Gal Maras in his hand, Karl Franz went on to reunite the empire. In an electoral conference, the largest reorganization of the empire since Magnus the Pious was passed, Hochland and Ostermark were restored as electoral provinces, with Suderland and Middenland becoming part of Middenheim and Weisenland. Talabheim and Talabekland were reunited as one province, whilst those that had been loyal to him were rewarded, like Marius Leitdorf and Valmir von Rukov. The revelation that Gaf Boris' former wife, the daughter of the Baron of Nordland, had been a Slanesh cultist caused a short war in which Ostland, Averland, Ostermark and Talbotland, as well as Weisenland and the two Archlectors of Sigmar, supported the recreation of an electoral province Nordland under those ruled by Theodoric Geyser. At some point following the turmoil in 2512, the empire was shaken by civil unrest after the revelation of vampire covens in Nuln. Karlberg was torn by riots. Kurt Helborg and his Reichsguard had to put down riots in Middenheim, and from Strisen and Saupfell, the southern empire fell into turmoil. During this time, many even claimed that Karl Franz himself had become a vampire. To calm the situation, Franz intended to visit Nuln. Altdorf itself had been shaken with riots after a terrible pox had ravaged most of the population, specifically targeting those who had been affiliated with the Lahmain Sisterhood. Grigor van Massinghoff, the mastermind behind the disease and a member of the Van Crestein vampiric bloodline, planned to have Emperor Karl Franz assassinated at Arkansas. Karl Franz had been infected with a very small pox. Dr. Gabler was to cure him. Von Messinghoff planned to paint Gabler as a Lahmain cat's paw and the Elector Countess as a vampire. He hoped to initiate a civil war between Reichland and Weisenland that could result in a four-sided conflict with Middelland and Tabakland that would have left the empire a weakened ruin. The plan went awry when von Carstein forces were attacked by Lahmains at Castle Ambrostein, with parts of their army destroyed. The fighting drew the troops of the Emperor to them before he had reached Arkansas. As Karl Franz prepared to attack from the rear, the Emperor and Ludwig Schwarzenhelm were challenged by Ulrika Staghov. The Emperor's champion easily defeated the vampire in a duel, while Karl Franz insisted that she be taken alive. With a new host of Lahmains arriving, the Emperor retreated, foiling von Messinghoff's plan. Karl Franz, now alerted, marched directly upon Nuln. When Ulrika was captured again, Karl Franz questioned her, revealing himself far more well-informed about the amount of influence the Lahmains maintained in the Empire and the discord that plagued the vampire bloodlines more than any normal person should. It was then that von Messinghoff struck, collapsing the bridges to the Iron Tower and launched an assault. As Karl Franz and Schwarzenhelm tried to flee from the Isle aboard a barge, Grigor von Messinghoff attacked them personally, and the sickened Emperor fought the vampire count. Despite his weakened status, Karl Franz fought well, wounding the vampire several times. However, he would go on to be saved by Ulrika Staghov, who killed von Messinghoff after his past treacheries had finally been revealed to her. Karl Franz took Ulrika captive once again, demanding answers. The vampire went on to warn Karl Franz of a darkness that was rising in Slovenia, and of the return of the vampire lord Manfred von Carstein. In exchange for this warning, Karl Franz allowed Ulrika to go unharmed. It was in that same year that Marius Leitdorf warned Karl Franz that a new greenskin warg poured out of the Blackfire Pass and threatened to overrun the province of Averland. He responded personally to this call and went to face the horde before it was too late, culminating in what would become the Third Battle of the Blackfire Pass. Because of his quick action, the Imperial army arrived just in time to block the entrance of the Blackfire Pass from the onrushing hordes of greenskin warriors. With a battle line of Imperial soldiers holding the enemies at bay, a barrage of Imperial artillery rained down cannonballs and grape shots upon the tightly packed enemy horde. The first few waves consisted mostly of goblins and a handful of orcs, but the appearance of a berserking giant soon threatened the Imperial line. Karl Franz, upon his griffin Deathclaw, fought the massive behemoth, but in the process Deathclaw was injured and was forced to retreat back to the command post. With his griffin returning to the comfort of Altdorf, Karl Franz watched as the battle continued its course. Time and time again, the greenskins crashed against the disciplined ranks of the Imperial army in waves. After many hours of fierce fighting, a loud noise arose to the northeast as a wave of greenskin warriors riding upon massive boars appeared from nowhere and tore through the Imperial artillery. Led by Warlord von Bag Ironjaw, the greenskin cavalry smashed into the left flank of the Empire's battle line. Because of this, entire regiments were caught while turning their formation to face the new threat and were easily killed. A few units managed to break ranks and flee, as panic had started to spread throughout the Imperial army by this point. The goblins at the front line were ruthlessly trampled to death as a new wave of heavily armoured orc warriors and massive trolls joined the fray. In just a short amount of time, the Empire lines were in tatters, with only the right flank conserving some sense of its previously formed order. In the centre of the battlefield, a small knot of determined greatswords stood alone in the sea of greenskins as they fought side by side with Marius Leitdorf. Warlord von Bad drove his gigantic mount through the company, tossing them aside like dolls, and made his way towards the Count himself. Marius bravely came forward to meet the monster, dodging the charging beast as he swung his ring fang in a deadly arc. The massive boar was disemboweled by the magic sword, and its rider fell to the ground. When the warlord rose to his feet, he smashed the Electoral Count into submission within mere seconds. The warlord grabbed the Count by the throat in a powerful grip, and after only a short struggle against his enemy, Marius' neck was snapped and he was killed. Desperate to hold the enemy back from ravaging the beautiful countryside of the Empire, Karl Franz led one final assault upon the greenskin hordes. This time on his warhorse, the Emperor led his Reichsguard knights in a massive cavalry charge that tore through the enemy ranks. But as the Empire faced the warlord Vorbarg, he made a charge. Karl Franz dodged his assault and struck back with Gal Maraz. The hammer hit the orc on the shoulder, and the pain sent the orc warlord into a berserk fury, attacking Karl Franz with extreme ferocity. As the two fought, the battlefield around them stood silent, as each army stopped and watched their two leaders fight it out. Though Karl Franz was a magnificent warrior, he could not overcome such a massive opponent. His strength was waning at times, and after time and time again, the blows began to take its toll upon his body. Finally, the Emperor began to give ground, and eventually fell to one knee. At this sight, a cry of pain came from the Empire's troops. Tasting victory, the warlord savoured the moment before he prepared to deliver the killing blow. Karl Franz was overwhelmed with pain, but he continued because if he had not, the remaining lands of the Empire would be ravaged by war, as well as plundered and its remaining people murdered. Deep down in his heart, he prayed for deliverance, for the strength to overcome his foe, just like Sigmar had done all those centuries ago. His silent prayer was answered. In that instant, a blinding aura shimmered around the Emperor's body, and the hammer glowed with a fierce golden light. All of a sudden, Karl Franz's pain was gone. His muscles became filled with unearthly strength, and a primal fighting spirit blossomed in his heart. As the Emperor rose to meet the huge orc once more, the warlord stopped in his tracks as the Emperor's appearance changed into a gigantic barbarian dressed in furs. The man shouted a loud battle cry that boomed amongst the mountains as it had done so all those centuries ago. Unbar Ogens. At that sound, the instincts of the warlord were overcome by memories inscribed into the soul of his race. Memories of mighty barbarians defeating the orcs in a war of domination on the rich plains, and driving them to the desolation beyond the mountains. In those times, these men were led by the very same champion, and it was him who had denied the possession of this land to the Greenskins. In that moment, and for the first time in his life, the warlord felt the coldness of fear wash upon him. The warlord stood dumbstruck, but it was this hesitation that cost him greatly. The barbarian king swung his giant warhammer at the orc's skull and struck him down. The events of Blackfire Pass were reenacted, and the Greenskin horde panicked and fled the battlefield at the sight of the fall of their warlord. As Vorbad's life drained from his body, he saw again through his bloodied eyes that the wounded body of Karl Franz, clad in black armour, was no longer the godlike enemy that had ended him. The warlord could not understand, and in his defiance he raised a claw in one last futile attempt to fight back. But all of his strength was gone, and his arm fell back, powerless, before his life left him. From that day on, the name of Karl Franz had been pronounced to the Empire with even greater pride, for all heard tales of the duel. And even though, in years to come, the story of the battle were embellished and exaggerated, everybody always agreed that on that day, Sigmar himself had fought alongside his descendant. Emperor Karl Franz had thought throughout his career to cement him and the Empire's relationship with the High King of the Dwarves, Thorgrim Grudgebearer, ever presenting him with precious notebooks of Leonardo di Miraglino, though it was unknown if this was indeed to be a gift, or if he was in search of guidance from them. Unfortunately, the Dwarf King was not impressed and mocked the work of humanity's greatest artists and engineers, believing them to be the work of human children. During the events of the end times, the Emperor proved his true devotion to his homeland and people by giving his life to hold back the hordes of Nurgle during the forces of Chaos's horrific siege of Altdorf. Just as his old ally, Lewin Leoncoeur, fell fighting Kugarth Plaguefather and his demonic hordes, so did Karl Franz fight the Glock King onto death. Outside the palace gates, Guruk Glot locked his tentacles around Deathclaw's neck. As his brother Otto approached the Emperor, Karl Franz was making his last stand, somehow standing bolt upright with an expression of grim determination on his features. The Emperor of the South holding a rune sword in one hand and his severed right arm squirting blood onto the gravel. He was pale, but determined to die with dignity. His opponent Otto Glot was about to attack his foe once more when a crescendo of galloping hooves gave him a moment of pause. He darted to the right and narrowly avoided having his head removed by a white-haired warrior with elaborate plate armour, hammering past with blade outstretched. The rider rode his way around the palace fountain, with a spray of gravel coming up behind his mount's hooves, coming up behind his master with a sword almost identical to that wielded by Karl Franz himself. The Emperor did not take his eyes from Otto Glot's, even as the warlord's giant brother fought to surpass the manic struggles of Deathclaw. Karl Franz's voice was steely under the pain as he greeted the Reich Marshal, who'd galloped to his side. The officer also eyed Otto with wary contempt. There was a crack of stone as Guruk hurled Deathclaw into a nearby fountain. The tension snapped, and all three warriors laughed at once. Otto Glot's scythe arced down towards Karl Franz's chest, with all the force he could muster behind it. The Emperor's runic blade came up awkwardly, but it was too slow. It was his bodyguard Helborg that blocked the blow, his rune fan hooking around the scythe's wooden neck and wrenching it from Otto's grip, to send it spinning across the courtyard. Growling, Otto whipped out the rusted sword of his waist before backhanding Helborg with such force that the Reich Marshal stumbled to the ground. Buying him precious seconds, Karl Franz was bought just enough time to plunge his rune fang into Otto's chest, but his lunge missed the warlord's heart by a finger's width. Otto twisted, kicking and yanking the rune sword from his foe's grip, punching his own blade at Karl Franz's throat. The blow never landed. Helborg's hand grabbed the blade tight, blood seeping from his grip as the Emperor staggered back. Otto simply ripped the rusted blade free, severing 3 of the Reich Marshal's fingers before lunging forward. The tip of the filthy sword punched into Helborg's eye socket with such force that it smashed out the back of his skull. Helborg stuttered out a plea of forgiveness in the name of Sigmar, before his corpse slid from the rusted blade onto the floor. Laughing, Otto rounded on the one-armed swordless Emperor once again, spinning the stolen rune fang up in the air in an arrogant display of swordsmanship. With Deathclaw pinned to the fountain by his immense bulk, Gorok also turned to loom over the Southern Lord. Lightning flashed overhead as Otto raised his stolen rune fang and swung it down with a roar of triumph. A thunderclap boomed high above Karl Franz as he raised his good arm to deflect the blow. The blade severed it without slowing and plunged deep into the Emperor's chest. The world seemed to freeze in fear for a brief second. Karl Franz sank to the flagstones of the Glotkins triumphant above him. With his final breath, the Emperor called for the gods one last time, and the world was changed forever. At that moment, the searing twin-tailed comet that was soaring the sky ahead smashed onto the lifeless body of the Emperor, and from the impact, an aura of blinding light was unleashed that saw the eradication of the unholy taint that had plagued the besieged city. From the light burst a tall, powerful man, wielding an ancient crackling warhammer, and with the mighty swing of his weapon, Sigmar struck the Glotkin brother and sent them back into the realm of chaos, never to return. This brings us to the end of today's video. It was a long one, so I hope you made it to the end, and if you did, I appreciate you for sticking around. If you like this more long-form content, then please leave a comment down below to let me know what type of stuff you'd like to see me do in the future. In the description down below, you will find 2 links. One to my partner Rothmer's channel, so if you enjoy MMOs and action RPGs, then please feel free to check that out. The second link is to our joint channel that I share with Rothmer, where we cover all things Warhammer. We've been building and painting so far, but we will soon be battling our armies against each other. So if that interests you also, then please feel free to check that out as well. Anyway, that'll be it from me today. Hope you guys have a wonderful day or night, wherever you are in the world. And as always, bye for now.